What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for listening. I wanted to put this in the top of the show. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon, patreon.com/Brennan Tassif. Check out the merch store at brennantcomedy.com to get your ex-drinking buddy merch. Subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. As always, we're coming to you live from Gotham Production Studios, and I hope you enjoy the episode.
Grab me your beer and grab me a coke. We bout to sit for an hour, bullshit and tell jokes. And please don't mix it up, cause he done sobered up. Brennan T Comedy on your social media feeds. And Brennan Tassif is your ex-drinking buddy. Brennan Tassif is your ex-drinking buddy. Brennan Tassif is your ex-drinking buddy. Brennan Tassif is your ex-drinking buddy.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into another edition of Brennan Tassif is your ex-drinking buddy. I'm your host, Brennan Tassif. If you're new to the program, quick rundown of the show. I used to be everyone's favorite drinking buddy. It was my favorite thing to do. Hang out with friends, get drunk, do drugs, get in all sorts of trouble, then reminisce about those crazy stories. I am sober now, but that is still one of my favorite things to do. Hang out with someone and talk about the crazy old days. Most weeks I'll be joined by a guest. This week is no exception. All the way from New York City via China, Ben Frank. What's up, man?
Not much. I'm happy to be here. This is fun.
Thanks for coming on.
No problem.
Before we get too far into anything, plug everything up front. Instagram, social media, any shows you have coming out. This will come out on Monday for everybody, so let everybody know.
Okay. Yeah. My Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and everything is Ben Frank Comedy. Ben Frank Comedy. So you can follow me on that stuff. I got a bunch of reels coming up. Let's see, for Monday shows, I guess. You can regularly catch me. I'm pretty often at the Grizzly Pear, New York Comedy Club, Comedy Shop, St. Mark's Comedy Club. So
my man's out here working.
Yeah. So just follow me on the socials, and I'll tell you where I'm at.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I've been trying to get you on now for a little while. We've been talking about this. We go to some of the same open mics and stuff, and we were talking about it. You have a very interesting story. Mm-hmm. You do talk about it on stage a little bit, but you lived in China for 7 years?
Yeah, seven years, from 2014 to 2021.
And what took you to China?
So I originally started studying Chinese in college, and I studied abroad in Beijing my junior year. And then a couple years after college, I found a job working for a real estate developer in Shanghai, and that was like the job that brought me out there. Okay. That I was like, oh, I'll move there for that job. That job didn't last very long.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Who knew? China real estate, unstable.
I wouldn't know.
Yeah. I mean, whoa, yeah. Big surprise there. And so literally like 4 months after I moved there, I was out of work after moving across the world.
Holy shit.
Yeah. And then I was looking for another job. I was looking for like other stuff in real estate because that was...
Did you decide to stay? Well, obviously you stayed in China, but when this happened, were you like, holy shit, like, what am I going to do? Or were you like, it looks like I'm here, so I'll just find another job?
So this is a weird thing. I didn't panic as much as you think I would, because it was actually my second time being out of work in Asia in the same calendar year.
Really?
Because before that, I had a job where I was like a special assistant to the CEO of like this real estate investment company that was based out of Hong Kong and Tokyo. So I was primarily spending time in Hong Kong and Tokyo, but the whole job was traveling. Like I didn't even have an apartment. Like that's how much.
So technically you hadn't made the move to China yet.
Yeah, so I wasn't living in mainland China. I was in Asia, but I was traveling all around. I was spending most of my time in Hong Kong and Tokyo. But that job, I only did it for a few months. This guy traveled everywhere, so in the span of a few months, I was in like Hong Kong, Tokyo, New York.
How did you get that job?
I saw it on like a listserv I was on for like Asia or China related job postings, and I looked at it and I was like, oh, I'll apply for that.
So did you major in Chinese when you were in college? Or Mandarin or Cantonese or what? You speak Mandarin, right?
Yeah, I speak Mandarin. So Chinese wasn't my major, but I studied it every semester I was in college.
What did you major in?
Philosophy, politics, and economics.
All three, or like a combination of the three?
So it was an interdisciplinary major that was one major that had all three components.
Okay.
Within it, yeah.
Yeah. What?
I know it's a lot. It's a lot being thrown at you here.
So I want to get to the comedy and everything because you did comedy in China.
Yes.
So I want to get to all that, but we've got to unpack this.
Yeah. No. Let's for that we need to start at the beginning.
Yeah. So when you go to college, so you go to high school. Where are you originally from?
Massachusetts.
Okay, and you go to high school in Massachusetts,
Yes.
and then you get done with high school and you decide I'm going to go to college. Do you have any inkling to do any sort of Asian studies or anything with China or anything like that when you're going into college?
So, I mean, my dad, like when I was in high school, had mentioned like, oh, studying Chinese might be a thing.
We've
to
all
do.
seen the movie Looper.
Yeah.
Jeff Daniels' character. I'm from the future. You want to learn Chinese?
Yeah, it was kind of like that because so my dad had like done business in Asia kind of while I was growing up. But at the time, since it was like the 80s and 90s, it was mostly in Japan that he was doing business. Because that's who was the major Asian power,
the superpower in Asia
at that point. And my dad was in like computer engineering, like technology and like microprocessors, the sort of stuff that the Japanese are good at and do. So he had done a lot of business in Asia, but he was kind of looking forward to like, oh, if you were going to do stuff in Asia moving forward, like China's what's going to be.
He would pivot to China. Yeah.
He's like, China is what's going to be big, like when you're, going to be at the point when you're working. So
when you're a kid, this is like something that he's talking, well, like not a kid, but when you're getting older, this is something he's bringing up.
Yeah, he said it when I was in high school, and I kind of like, filed it away. And then when I started in college, like we had like a 4-semester language requirement. And I'm like, well, if I have to take a language, I might as well like try to learn Chinese and see what happens. Yeah. So that was basically how it started.
Because you have that whole bit about you just learn Chinese to get Asian girls.
Yeah.
Like I can't even get American girls.
Yeah. It's like,
so when you decide like, okay, where did you go to college?
UPenn.
Okay.
In Philadelphia.
The Ivy League school?
Yeah. just turn to the camera. I know. See, this is
you're Ivy League educated.
Yeah, I know, and this is what
I've heard of your jokes. You're doing dick jokes.
This is and this is when people say that it like that, the implication is you're Ivy League educated, and this is what you're doing with your life.
It's not even that because I get the same thing. Like I scored a 164 on my LSATs. I did really, really well, and everyone's like, "You didn't go to law school." It's like, no, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm doing. So I totally understand that, and it all makes a lot more sense because your dick jokes are very, very nuanced, and I'm being serious. Like the joke you have about like the girls at the coffee shop, that's fucking hilarious.
Oh, thank you.
And it's one of those things where, because I'm one of those guys, like I don't talk about sex a lot on stage, but when I do, it's very just like kind of low hanging, like, yeah, obviously. But you do it in a way where the Ivy League education makes so much more sense now.
Okay.
So you finish high school and then you go to UPenn and then you have to take a language, and obviously it's an Ivy League school, so they offer way more languages. Like I went to a state school in Florida, so you could take like Spanish or Spanish, and that was kind of it. So you take Mandarin because that's the predominant dialect, right?
Yeah, that's the one that they. I mean, I think you probably could have taken Cantonese classes, but I mean, almost everyone who's taking Chinese would be taking Mandarin just because it's the one that most practical.
Just in the back of your head, and then you decide. Which I think it's super cool because you're taking philosophy and like this interdisciplinary studies program. So it's not like you're in business and then taking Chinese, and then taking Mandarin, like, oh, I'm going to take over the world. You're doing something, obviously, that you want to do in philosophy and politics. And what was the third one? Economics. And so, but then you're also like, well, let me learn this just to have it.
Yeah.
And so at what point are you like, like signing up for the job boards for Asia and stuff? Like at what point in your college career are you like, oh, I think I might go over there?
So, I mean, I studied it for like the first 2 years of college, took the 4 semesters of Chinese. And then like a lot of people during their second year of college are thinking like, oh, if I want to study abroad, usually like your junior year is the time where like most people would do it. So there were like a lot of like study abroad fairs that would happen where you could see like what different programs were in different countries, like to see if there's anything that fit for you. And I remember like going to one of these study abroad fairs and just seeing some of these programs, and one in particular that was just like, okay, you go to Beijing for the semester, there's a full-time language pledge where like you have to sign a contract saying like you won't speak English for the whole semester, like 24 hours a day. And I was like, oh, that would be like a really good way to get good at Chinese.
Yeah.
And so
fully immersive.
Right. So I signed up for that program and did that for a semester. And that was kind of what really like helped me level up with my Chinese. And so then I came back, finished college, and just took a job in consulting because at UPenn it's big, business, the Wharton School.
Yeah.
A lot of people end up just going into consulting, finance, banking, because those
It's all about who you know, not what you know.
well, and because those companies there's this like thing called on-campus recruiting where those companies will just come to Penn to conduct interviews. So basically you can like apply for like a million jobs and just see which jobs you get interviews for, and they will come to the campus and interview you. You don't, at least for the first round, like you don't have to go anywhere.
This is breaking news on the podcast. They don't do that at Florida State schools.
That's what. Yeah. So for like
but at Ivy League schools, I could imagine they're probably lining up to get the best and the brightest.
Yeah. If you get a second round or final round interview, you usually have to like go to their office. You might have to go to another city if that's where they're based or whatever. But like for the first round, they will dispatch people to come to campus and just like interview people en masse.
Yeah.
To see like who might be a good fit for
it's a smart thing to do.
Yeah. So but most of the companies that do that are things like consulting, finance, banking. So
you do the study abroad, just so everyone's tracking. You do study abroad your junior year.
Yeah.
You come back, and then once you finish school, you just you do one of these like job fair things, basically.
Right. So I end up working in consulting here in New York for a year. But as I'm doing this job, it's like it's consulting. It pays well, but the hours are not great, and it's not really what I want to be doing with my life. And I knew in the back of my head, I'm like, I kind of want to do something Asia related. So on that,
yeah, you do.
Yeah. So on that job, that I saw that posting for that job for
the special assistant,
being a special assistant to the CEO of that company, and I was like, why don't I apply for this? It's a long shot, but let's see. And then I do like a kind of a virtual interview with them since it's across the world, and then it goes well enough where they're like, I'm in whatever sort of shortlist or final round or whatever. And they're like, the guy wants to do like an in-person interview. So they flew me out to Tokyo for an interview.
First class, business class, coach?
Coach. Just coach. So it's like cool, but not that cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's so cool that they paid for it, but it's...
Yeah. But it was, I had to lie with that. One of the things you had to like, but you had to lie to get the time off of work. Cause it was also a weird
thing. Yeah. Cause you're still doing the consulting job.
Yeah. I'm still working with the consulting job. And my interview in Tokyo was on like a Wednesday morning.
Tokyo or local time?
In Tokyo.
Okay.
So obviously that's in like the middle of the week. So to make that work, I had to like fly out of New York like Monday night.
Yeah, because they're ahead of day.
Right. Get there Tuesday night, do the interview Wednesday morning, fly back on Thursday, and then I went into work in New York on Friday again. So I
how did you get did you just ask for the time off, like PTO or something, or did you have to make up an excuse?
I asked for the time. I think it was one of those where
grandma died or something.
So it was one of those things. I actually right before that did have a fairly close relative who died, and we had just had the funeral. But I was like, oh, I need to help out my family with some other stuff for later.
Okay, yeah, you parlayed it. Yeah.
So it was like a partial lie.
Yeah, I mean, we've all been there. One time, I had a job, and I don't want to air like family laundry or whatever, but like something had happened, and I had to leave the job. And then when I got back, this is when I was still drinking. Then when I got back, I was like, I don't want to fucking go back to work. So I just called and was like, same thing. Like something came up with the thing that we're dealing with. So I'm going to need another week. And they're like, yeah, absolutely. Take as much time as you need. And I was like, already back home. I was just like, I just want to take a week off.
Right.
So I totally understand that. And so then you do the interview. Obviously it goes well.
Yeah, it goes well. See, but the thing is, I want to say this was in like April. So this is in the spring. So it goes well, but they're taking their sweet time.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
on this whole thing. And
quick side note, you said it's in Tokyo. You don't speak Japanese?
I don't speak Japanese.
So when you went after the job posting, the business I'm assuming is based in China, or the CEO is a Chinese gentleman?
So this is interesting. The CEO is not Chinese. He was American, but he started a real estate investment company out in Asia. That was basically based out of Hong Kong and Tokyo at that time, but he had done more business in mainland China before. They had 4 offices at the time, I believe. It was Hong Kong, Tokyo, Shanghai, and Taipei. Those are their 4, but their main offices were in Hong Kong and Tokyo.
Okay, so I'm I'm assuming in Asia, it's a lot like in Europe where everyone speaks like 3 or 4 different languages, or is that not the case?
It's not really the case.
Okay.
Some people do, but it's since the countries are generally bigger than in Europe, it's not. You don't see people being as multilingual.
Okay.
As
because I know,
as we
like
do.
in Europe, they always make fun of Americans because they're like, oh, I speak French, German, like
Right.
4 different. But so I just assumed maybe if you went to China, especially with a CEO who's American but also has holdings in all those different areas, I'm assuming he would speak.
So he was fluent in both Mandarin and Japanese.
Yeah, that's what I would assume. Okay.
And he was conversational in Cantonese. So just like a white guy from New York that did all this
And that
stuff.
blows my mind too, because I think Cantonese behind English is like the second hardest language in the world to learn.
Yeah, Cantonese is I don't really know any Cantonese, but just based on what I know about Chinese languages
even Mandarin
in general,
like
I
super
think
hard.
that Cantonese is harder than Mandarin.
God, that's insane to me.
Yeah.
So you get the job, but how long? So this interview's in April, and then how long does it take to get the job?
I find out in July.
Okay, so not.
But then
months.
by the time I start, it's like October.
Geez, so this almost took like half the year.
This took a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. This took a while. So I started this job.
And just little details. I'm obsessed with these. So financially, are you like, I can't quit my main job because I need to pay my bills? Are you living in a situation where you're like, oh, I can quit and take like a month or 2 off before I start the new job? Or like, what's going through your head? I mean, you're 22, 23 years old. So like, what's going through your head financially, or just as basically a kid about to embark on this huge adventure? Are you like freaking out, or like what's going on?
I mean, my thing was just that this process to get this job took so long that I was like, let's just start as quickly as possible before they changed their mind or whatever.
Yeah.
Like I didn't want to wait
Yeah.
any longer. So yeah, I move out there in October. But as I said, I'm traveling all the time, so I don't even have an apartment. I'm technically, according to HR and everything, I'm based out of Hong Kong, but I'm rarely there.
Where's your stuff?
So my stuff was not permanently anywhere, really.
But I mean, it had to have been some like your stuff from college, like your clothes, all that kind of stuff. Like, where is it in a storage unit? Is it back home?
I kept some stuff like stored or like in a storage unit, either with family or
Okay.
things like that. But
Yeah.
I was traveling and didn't have an apartment. Was spending most of my time in Tokyo, some in Hong Kong, and then was just traveling to various places. As I said, we came back to the U.S. at one point. We were in New York and L.A. and Orange County. Then I was in like London, Frankfurt, Israel, Hawaii.
This is a nuts
Taipei.
4 months.
Yeah, this is it was an insane amount of travel.
And then what happens? What happens with the job?
So, at one point, this was the following February. So I started in October. This is the following February. We're in Hong Kong. I'm at the Hong Kong office. It's about going home time for the day, and my boss is just like, hey, can you bring me some documents? Like, bring me this. He was living in Hong Kong. He lived at the Four Seasons residences. So he said, can you just bring the stuff to the lobby of the Four Seasons residences, which wasn't an unreasonable request.
Yeah.
I was like, okay.
This is a common thing in major cities. They're fancy hotels, but they also have, like the Plaza does it here in New
Right.
York. They're fancy, super fancy hotels, but like at the top, like 6 floors or 10 floors or whatever, they're actual apartments that you can rent.
Yeah. Long-term residences. Fancy rich
Super
people.
fancy. Super fancy.
Yeah. So I go to the lobby of the Four Seasons residences, which is, again, separate lobby from the regular hotel lobby. Yeah. So so I sit on the couch, give him the documents, and at some point he looks at me and he goes, I need to make a change. And then he just basically tells me that I'm getting fired.
Were you doing something wrong? Did he give you any reason, or?
I mean, I think it just wasn't working for him. So there was no previous so it's one of those things where you get blindsided by something.
Yeah.
And then you look back, and then once you know how it ended, you see points where you're like, oh, I guess this makes sense if you connect that dot, that dot, that dot, and that dot.
The usual suspects.
Right. But there were times where maybe I did things and he wasn't totally satisfied with my work. But from what I saw, that was just the process of like, you're just starting at a new company, you're working with a new boss, and you're figuring out how they like things done. Because every boss is different. And that's just a part of when you started a new company. Everybody.
Yeah, it's growing pains.
Right. Everybody goes through that, figuring out how to work with people. But he was the type of like kind of like the eccentric genius CEO. Very difficult to work with, and also just not very communicative, and kind of someone who you needed to be able to read his mind.
Speaks 5 languages but can't communicate.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Sounds like a rom-com. So I think it just maybe a couple things happened with work I did where he didn't like the way I did it, but he didn't necessarily wasn't like, hey, I want you to fix these things, this thing, and this thing. Or like if he really saw a problem, he wasn't like, hey, we should talk about this and get this fixed and sorted out. I think he saw a couple problems and then just kind of decided in his head, this isn't going to work, but never really told me about it. Didn't give me an opportunity to fix it or improve myself.
Were you pissed off? Like you'd gone across the world for this job, and then it was just after 4 months. It took you longer to get to the job than it did than you were in the job.
Yeah.
Dude, I'd start breaking shit. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, I just remember, I mean, I really had to fight back from literally crying on the spot.
Yeah.
I think I probably did, just because I had moved my whole life across the world. At the time, I actually was doing long distance with a girlfriend back in New York.
Yeah.
At the time, I'd moved my whole life. And I had quit a stable, good, high-paying job in New York
to do this. So now this is because you said you were traveling so much and everything like that, but HR technically had you based in Hong Kong. When this happens, do you have an apartment to go back to? Like where do you go?
So on that particular trip, that was the first trip. So for the first few times I went to Hong Kong, because it was early, they put me up in a place just because I, quote unquote, hadn't had time to find a place yet. But it would have been impossible because I was barely there. I couldn't even look for a place.
Yeah.
So, but the rule was after a certain time, if I was in Hong Kong, I had to find my own accommodation. So I was just in like an Airbnb.
Okay.
But I remember it was February, which Hong Kong is a very warm place. But February is like the 2 or 3 weeks a year where it's kind of cold.
Yeah.
And since it's a really warm place, there's no heating like in the whole city.
Florida's a lot like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of a very similar climate to Florida in the sense that it's like super, super humid. But so I remember it's like the middle of February. This happens to me. I got to go back to this Airbnb that I'm staying in. And I just remember just freezing. Just like
freezing alone.
And just having no job.
And the most foreign place you could be, literally on the opposite.
Yeah. I just remember because it's
I'm getting excited just thinking about it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Hong Kong is, as I said, Hong Kong is a super like hot, humid place. Like anyone who goes is like, oh my God, it's way too hot here. And it is for 95, 97% of the year. But there's like a few weeks where it gets, like occasionally in Florida where
it drops down to like 32 or 30. And everyone's like, what is happening?
Right. And you just
global warming. Am I right, guys?
Right. And if you're going to be in a house or an apartment that has no heating or insulation, and you got to like put on your hoodie and everything when you go to sleep. And it's just one of those where, now I'm like unemployed across the world. I'm cold. But I also had to like most of their HR stuff was in Japan, in Tokyo. So after this trip or whatever, I had to fly to like Tokyo to do like exit stuff.
Yeah.
And
did they take care of you at least? Like as far as like a severance and all that?
Yeah, I got a good severance package, especially just.
You don't have to get too far into it, but I just wanted to make sure because you're here now and I know everything worked out.
Right.
But as you're telling the story, I'm like, so how did you survive? Like, how did you live?
Yeah. I mean, luckily, especially because it was so out of nowhere and I wasn't really fired for cause. I think they were pretty generous with the severance just so
HR hates that CEO.
Yeah.
They're like, another fucking guy he fired. We gotta give this person hush money basically to be like, so they don't file a lawsuit for you being fired, terminated with no cause.
Right. So that
and you're like, yes, I will take my hush money and be on my way. Thank you.
Right. But that was, I mean, Well, you can't underrate how helpful that money is.
Yeah.
Just because it gives you the time to figure out your life without having to worry about paying bills in the short term.
I talk about this all the time. Ryan Thomas and I were talking about this because he was working like a corporate job and saved a bunch of money before he moved to New York. And then when he got here, he just like does mics and stuff. And or not, excuse me, that's disrespectful. He does comedy. He does a lot of shows, but I'm saying when we run into each other, it's mainly at mics. But he does a ton of shows and just works on comedy and just does that because, like you said, that cushion he was able to give himself by saving. So you're in the same situation, you get fired, but then they give you the severance and you're like, oh, I don't have to freak out.
Right. So
I've just real quick, I find myself in that opposite position where I have a really good job in New York, but then I blew all this money on the one-man show and everything. And now I'm like, oh, now I'm freaking the fuck out because I have to still do comedy and the podcast and everything, but I'm out of money.
Right.
So it's like I still have to pay rent, which is a way worse spot to be in, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
But now you're at a position where what do you decide I'm just going to look for another job?
So basically at that point, since I have a girlfriend back in New York and because this job was my whole life, I didn't have any friends out in Asia at this point. I'm like,
well, you're traveling so much you can't establish any kind of roots or anything.
Right. So I'm like, I got to move back to New York, at least to figure things out in the short term. So I moved back. I'm living in New York. I'm like, okay, I'll look for jobs in New York, but I'll also look for jobs in Asia. I kind of do both.
Let's go back to Asia.
Right. But so I'll be in New York. So I was in New York for a few months, was looking for jobs in New York, got like a couple interviews here or there, but they didn't really go anywhere. And I was just getting more traction applying for like Asia related or Asia based jobs.
Well, because I'm sure it's a huge benefit that one, that you went to an Ivy League school in America, and two, because, I know a lot of people come over from Asia to go to Harvard and Yale and UPenn and Columbia and, even New York.
Right.
So the fact that you already had that education and the fact that you speak the two hardest languages in the world to learn, Mandarin and English.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, it just kind of how it ended up working is that the best job offer I got was to work for that real estate developer in Shanghai. And so it was kind of a situation where I was like, I need to get my career back on track. I've wanted to move to China. If I'm ever going to do it, this is it.
Yeah.
This is the opportunity. So, I mean, it was kind of a difficult thing because it was necessary at that point, like kind of had to have the hard conversation with
the girlfriend,
with my girlfriend. We'd been together for like 2 years at that point.
And you're like, I got to do this.
Yeah. Cause it was because if I turned down the job to be with her, I had no other job opportunity. It wasn't even like I was choosing between like a New York job and a job in China at that point. It's like I didn't have another option.
Well, and the resentment is astounding.
Mm-hmm.
That was we don't have to get into it.
No, that was
off the breakup.
That was what I ultimately decided when I was thinking about it, is that even if we are together and we get married and we're reasonably happy, I would resent you for the rest of my life for being the reason I didn't move to China.
Yeah. So the new job, and then we got to get into some stories. We got to get into comedy. But the new job, that's more of a stationary position. That's like you move to Shanghai. This is where you're based out of. You get an apartment. The whole deal.
Yeah. Okay. And then any of the travel would be like domestic travel within China.
Okay. Cool.
But then that job in like another 4 months falls apart. And so it's like, but the weird thing is, since I just went through this other one, like losing a job for the second time in such a short time.
Oh yeah, because you had said earlier you were like, this is the second time, and then we got off track.
Right, was easier because one, I was like, I know I want to still be in China, and I'm looking for jobs while I'm here on the ground, which is easier than having to look for them from across the world. So I was kind of weirdly like, this will be fine. This is weird and frustrating, but it'll be fine. And I was about to start working for another real estate company. Then like literally 5 days before I was about to start this job, I got a message from this guy I had met like 2 or 3 years before, who is like a headhunter who places bilingual foreigners in jobs in China. And he sends me a message and he's like, I have this opportunity and you're the first person I thought of. And I'm like, this is weird because I'm not like great friends with this guy. I met him once.
You're like, I haven't thought of you. 2 or 3. That's weird.
Yeah. And so I'm like, I'm about to start. He didn't even know I was looking for jobs. That's the other weird thing when he sent this message. And I was like, I'm about to start another job. I can't really. And then he's like, we should talk. So then I call him on the phone. We talk. And he's like, the job is with the NBA.
Bam!
Yeah. And then I'm like, well, now I have to
Yeah.
try to get this job. But I told him the problem is I'm supposed to. I think it was a Wednesday, and I'm supposed to start a job literally the following Monday.
Yeah.
I've already signed the contract and everything, and I said, "How long will this interview process take? Like to see if I get this NBA job?" And he's like, "I can get you through the interview process in 2 weeks." So basically, I made up an excuse with this other job of why I had to delay my start date by 2 weeks.
Yeah. Because you can't just tell them fuck off because in case you don't get the NBA job, you'd be screwed.
Yes, exactly. So I go through 3 rounds of interviews in 2 weeks. The first round, was going to be with my future boss. Second round with HR. Third round was with like basically the number 2 at NBA China, like the executive vice president.
So like third or fourth person down from Adam Silver.
I mean, it depends how you.
Well, I'm saying like if Adam Silver's here and then you go to the China branch, it'd be like
it's like the second guy at the China branch.
Okay.
At the China business. I don't know where it would rank in all the NBA hierarchy, but yeah, basically the number 2 at the company. And I end up getting the job, and I just don't show up for my first day at the real estate company. When they thought I was going to start work, I literally I think on the day was like, yeah, I'm not coming.
Did you call or
I think I called or emailed or I sent something. Yeah.
You're like, I'm out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Damn. That's quite an adventure.
Yeah. It was insane. Well, actually, the funny thing about this real estate company, I had applied for, when I was in New York the previous year, I had applied for a similar or maybe the exact same position with that company in Shanghai. And I had an interview with their, like, not their CEO, but it was like a research position at a real estate company. And I had this interview with like their head of research for Asia. He happened to be in New York at the time, so he interviewed me at the Carnegie Deli.
Yeah. Classic.
Yeah, at the Carnegie Deli. And I had one of the worst interviews I've ever had in my life. I was totally unprepared for it. I didn't, just the types of stuff he was asking, thought it was going to be a real estate interview, ended up being more of like a consulting type interview with the questions I was asking, which I'd done consulting before, but those types of interviews, you need to be like preparing
you have
for
to
them.
prep, yeah.
And just because it's a very specific type of interview, and if you haven't been prepping, you're just not going to be sharp and you're not going to be
a lot of the answering questions with questions kind of a thing.
Yeah, it's like they're like case problems.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of just seeing how you think and stuff. So you have to. It takes a lot of practice.
Yeah.
And if you're out of practice, you're just not going to do well with that sort of thing. And I just did badly. I did not get the job. So then basically a year later, that head of research or whatever had moved on to another company. So the top interview was with like his deputy who had interviewed me before the previous year and had passed me on to the big boss. But now basically he was the big boss because there was no one above him, at least for the moment. So he offered me this job, but then I spurned him. So I kind of got back at this company.
Fuck 'em.
For it was like this revenge thing where they rejected me and then I rejected them a year later.
Take that. You'd be shocked how long my list is of people where I'm like, just wait till it gets big. Just wait till the podcast blows up. And then you're going to be like, hey, can I promote? I'm going to be like, no, fuck off.
Yeah, I'm not. I wouldn't be shocked, I don't think.
No, yeah.
You seem like exactly the type of person.
Hell yeah. I want to talk to you about how you got into comedy.
Right.
And then we do have some drinking stories, too, that we may or may not get to because I'm having so much fun talking about just this stuff. When did you start doing stand-up?
So I started doing stand-up when I was living in Shanghai, about a year after I moved there.
Okay. And now I had Damon Sumner on, who did the Kung Fu comedy.
Right.
Did you have any affiliation with them when they were out there?
Yeah. So Kung Fu comedy was the club that I started with.
Okay.
So, but Damon and I think were in China at different times, so we never crossed paths when I was there.
But it's still like 2 degrees of separation.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Bringing people together here on X Drinking.
Yeah.
So, were you always a fan of comedy? Like, how did you? It's starting is hard enough, and I've talked to a lot of different people, and some people start when they're super young, some people wait till they're a little older, or in like my case, I started young and then took a break and then got back into it. What were you always a fan of stand-up or comedy, or like what pushed you to be like, oh, I want to try this?
It's funny. I mean,
especially in China where it's an authoritative government.
It's funny because like I always enjoyed comedy. I liked comedy movies and stuff like that. And I watched some stand up growing up, but whenever I watched stand up, I never thought like, oh, I can do that or I should do that. The thought never occurred to me, not once. But the way I end up getting into it was right after I started working for the NBA. They had this like this company event where it's one of these like biannual events where each department makes like a presentation of what their goals are for the fiscal year. It's like bringing the whole company together. But it's a pretty dry thing. So they wanted to break it up by having like an employee talent show type of thing. And they were just like desperate to get people for this talent show because no one wants to sign up for that. But as like the new employee, I was kind of like, oh, I'll do it. You know, because you're doing it. You're like the new person. But I volunteered to do it without even knowing what I was going to do.
Yeah.
And
I'll just talk.
Right. No. And then I was talking to someone, a colleague at the office, and they were like, can you do impressions? And I was like, yeah, I actually can.
Yeah.
So then I wrote, I had never done comedy before. I thought of some impressions that maybe I could do. And I kind of wrote some jokes or impressions and put them all together. And I did a set.
Murdered.
And so it's weird. I wouldn't say I murdered. It was like I think some people in the audience were like, I don't know what's going on here. But the people who knew what I was doing or who were into it really loved it.
Yeah.
And I got like enough of a positive reaction where I was like, oh, I should find open mics. So then from there, I was like, I started looking for open mics in Shanghai and Beijing and just started from there.
God, that's crazy. So because you wrote, we'll tie this together. So you wrote China. That's all you wrote. When I said send me a list of some of your drinking stories, like bullet points, were you getting after it when you were in China?
So it's interesting because some of the first drinking stories I would think of originally were from when I studied abroad because it's just
okay. So this is before when you're still in college. When did you start drinking?
So how do we want to? Well, okay.
See how I did that?
Yeah.
See what I did there?
Yeah.
Pretty good host.
Yeah. So the first time I ever drank, like aside from kind of at dinner, like my dad giving me like a sip or two. But like the first time I really drank, I was 14 years old.
Yeah, you were.
Yeah, you're like, oh, I like where this story's going. So I have a sister who's 5 years older than me. Mm-hmm. So it was in the summer. She was back home from college. It was either after her freshman or sophomore year of college, and she like had a party with some people at like our mom's house. And
mom's out of town.
Yeah, she was somewhere. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, she's
somewhere.
Moms being moms.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't remember exactly where she was, but anyways, my sister and I had always been very close. So she was just, and I was hanging around. I knew some of her friends, so she was just like, "Oh, you can hang around. We can drink a little bit with us." Or, and at first things were all right. I was playing a little bit of like beer pong with her friends. And,
big party, small party, 10, 12 people, or 40, 50 people.
I would say somewhere in between, maybe like close to like 20 to 30, that range.
So it's not like out of control, but there's enough people there where you can kind of get lost in it.
Yeah, it's a real house party. It's it's not one of those where you can lose track of people for sure. So then after you're young, you're playing beer pong, you're feeling yourself a little bit, and you're because when you get to that point, especially I feel like when you haven't drank before and you get like a little bit, you just get like a little bit drunk. You're like, oh, this feels like pretty good. And you're like, I want to keep going.
It's pretty fucking awesome.
Yeah, you're like, I want to keep going.
Sometimes that spirals you into an alcoholic.
Yeah. Hey, this is the podcast. And so very predictably, or maybe I don't know, whatever.
Yeah. I think we all see where this is going.
I was like, well, I'm not getting drunk fast enough here. This is very inefficient. So I was like, I'm gonna go upstairs and make myself a rum and coke.
There you go.
And if I don't know, if you were a young lad who didn't know anything about how to mix drinks, how would you make a rum and coke?
Probably 50-50.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that is what I did. And it did not go well. I was on my as time passed, my sister starts to realize like, oh, I think he's like how did he get this drunk I'll just playing a little bit of beer pong, and then like the truth starts to come out. I'm like, I made rum and coke, and she's like, how much rum? I'm like, half rum, half coke. She's like, what?
Yeah.
And then
are you like stumbling around, not being coherent, just belligerent?
Not belligerent, but I think like probably stumbling around or like kind of struggling to stay conscious. And then I'm like getting ready to puke. So then I'm like, so I still remember this, or either I remember it or she told me. It's hard to know with these things. But I was like, I had my chin in the toilet and I'm puking at it. I don't know, at that point in time, a lot of the fast food places weren't open late, but Wendy's had a drive-through window that was open till like 1 or 2 a.m.
They were the first ones that did it.
So it was a big deal. So my sister, when she would have these parties, someone would go out at like, midnight or 1 and go get some Wendy's for people, someone who was still able to drive. And so I just remember, I think I'm like,
or not so able to drive,
or whatever, just get back, whatever. And so I'm like puking in the toilet. And I think my sister's just there, like chomping on a bacon cheeseburger.
Junior bacon, baby.
Yeah, just like she's
got a JBC and she's just like, look at
just
you,
like,
you're
oh
a
my
mess.
god, this is terrible. I was like, and she's like, and so, but she's like terrified that because I was like pretty drunk, so she, when I like went to bed, she like periodically came in to check on me.
Yeah, she was actually worried
that I was still breathing and still alive and all that stuff. So I made it through that night, but that was one of those that like scares you off from drinking.
So that's what I was going to ask. So after that, did you not drink again for a while?
Yeah, I didn't really drink again for a while. So for pretty much
the rest of high school?
For pretty much all of high school, I didn't really drink.
Okay.
Until so like second semester senior year, I kind of have that thing because we've kind of talked about my background. I worked pretty hard in high school. I didn't really party. I stayed on the straight and narrow. But you kind of
you went to an Ivy League school. We got it, Ben. You're better than all of us.
That's not what I'm saying. Hear me out here. But you've seen this trajectory before where people work themselves to death. They get burnt out, and then like second semester senior year, they're like, did I miss out on high school?
Yeah.
Did it like oh? And then you try to get it all back in like 3 months.
Yeah. So is that what you did?
A little bit because I was basically at the point where I'm like, okay, I've applied to all the colleges I've applied to. I can't do anything else anymore.
It's out of your control now.
It's out of my control. And if I'm gonna like drink or let loose in high school, this is my last chance.
Yeah. Because when you do it the next year, it's creepy.
Yeah.
Because you're out of high school,
Right.
but you still come back to be
Right,
like,
right.
hey guys.
Yeah.
We had a lot of people who did that, actually.
Yeah, it seems like a very Florida thing.
Yeah. Where like we would graduate and then we had some guys went like to play college football and stuff, and then after a semester they're like, I want to go home. Like I don't like it here anymore. And they would come home and then you'd see them at like Friday night football game. Like I would come home like, in the off season or whatever to like come visit, and they're like at the basketball games on a Thursday, like at the high school. And it's like, dude, you graduated like 2.5 years ago. Like what's happening?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a Florida thing. Let's talk more about Massachusetts. So you decide like you want to get crazy, but not too crazy.
Well, but people had always told me, they would be like, oh, you should, one of those things people are like, oh, you should have a party. It's like, you have a good house for a party. Mm-hmm. Because my house was it was like set back and it was a little bit in the woods. So it was good for a party in terms of like you wouldn't get noise complaints or things like that. Mm-hmm. So people were always like, oh, you should have a party. And then I was like, one time I was like, and at that point, my dad had a girlfriend who lived in another place. So he was going out of town a decent amount.
Was your dad's house or your mom's house the one that was the party house?
My dad's house. So I was living with my dad in high school. So this was
when did your parents get divorced?
When I was 10.
Okay. When I was 12.
Oh, nice. There we go.
So your parents get divorced. You're living with your dad. Are you primarily with your dad?
Yeah. So from 8th grade through the end of high school, I lived with my dad.
Okay. And so everyone's like, dude, this is the house. And your dad's got, hot new girlfriend, so he's never home. And
right. He's out of town on the weekend. So
I'm sure he traveled. Was he still doing the business stuff? Was he still traveling?
He wasn't traveling as much internationally at that point.
I was gonna say that's a movie right there. That's a script. Dad's just out of town all the time.
Right.
So party. Take us through it.
So then I'm like, I'm gonna have I'm gonna have something in my house. Mm-hmm. So tell some people, and it was a nice party. We probably had like, a good sized party. We probably had like 30 people there, but it was still in the range where it could be controlled.
Yeah. Well, the reason I chuckle is I've been doing this show for a few years now, and I've had hundreds of guests on, and this is the first time I think someone goes, yeah, my dad was out of town and we had a party. And you know what? It was actually a nice party. Normally, it's like things got way too out of control.
Well, so we had like 30 people. It was controllable, did well, and I got away with it.
Yeah.
But when you get away with it,
that doesn't seem foreboding at all.
Right. You start to get more brave.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And brazen.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I can do anything. So then the people who were at that party were like, oh, that was fun. We should do that again. So then the next time my dad was out of town, I'm like, oh, I'm having a party. But then it's like, word had gotten out about the previous party. I promoted this one way more, and it was like, oh, this
is the one we were waiting for.
This is you're like this was one of those examples where the sequel was better than the original. By better I mean worse, but better, way better. This one, I have no idea of knowing how many people were at this party, but I'm guessing it was at least 100.
That's a lot.
I more than could be counted. I mean, it was.
What happened? Cops show up?
So,
well, you said it's kind of set back, so you're not getting noise
It's kind of set back. At one point,
are you calling the cops? Like, get these people out of my house?
So I think it's one of those. At those parties, a lot of times, like people yell cops and there aren't cops.
Yeah.
So that might have happened at one point. I don't think the cops actually came, but it just got so big, so unwieldy. At one point, this kid, I think it was Adam Metzger, he was like a football lacrosse player. I had one of those.
Shout out Adam.
Yeah. I don't know if you have one of these.
Hope you don't have a wife and kids right now.
Yeah.
Because Ben's going to bury you.
I don't know. Have you ever seen like these refrigerators that freezers that like when you close them, they like magnetically seal for a few seconds? Like you literally can't open them. Mm-hmm. So we had one of these like fridges or freezers. So basically the door to the fridge or the freezer closes. And I think it was Adam Metzger. He like big football lacrosse guy. Like tries to open it, but it's impossible. You can't open it. It's magnetically sealed. And basically he pulls it so hard that he rips the freezer door off.
This motherfucker.
So he like didn't rip the whole door off, but it was like a nice wood finish attached to the actual door, but it was the handle and like the whole
paneling.
The whole panel of the door is torn off. And I'm like, well, I can't hide that. That's pretty obvious.
So Adam, you piece of shit.
Yeah. And so then I'm like, then it's one of those things where like the next day, it's one of those things where there are those, those like those heroes who come to your party and they're like, we're gonna help you clean up the next day. So I did have some of those. I cleaned up the house pretty good. And also one of the kids who came to the party, he's like, oh, my dad's a carpenter. He'll come and fix your door. And and he literally did.
Get the fuck out of here.
I'm not kidding you. His dad came, fixed the freezer door.
Oh my God. The reason I'm so blown away is that sounds like a fucking Coke conversation at 2 a.m. in the back of a bar. Like, we should start a business. I'll go get the loan paper tomorrow. Yeah. It's like no one's doing anything.
Yeah, no. And he was like, I'm like, okay. And then his dad literally came. I think it's also, I lived in like kind of like a liberal hippie town, so I feel like his dad was just like a hippie carpenter who just like didn't care.
Jesus. His dad was Jesus.
Yeah. Oh, pretty much. Yeah. So he fixes the door. So we're good on that front.
Yeah.
And clean things up pretty well, but it's like, it was impossible to catch everything. There were too many people there. And
what happened when he got home?
So he comes home, he looks, the funny thing is, it's always like the first thing people notice, it's like, it's a small thing.
It's something you would never see.
It's never a big thing.
Yeah.
But then that opens up the floodgates.
Yep.
And it was one of those where I think the first thing I remember, I think it was just he noticed that because he'd only been gone like a couple days or whatever, that like one of the like paper towel rolls somewhere was like way more used up or something.
Than it should have been.
It should have been like just something
like I just replaced this. Why is this empty?
Right. So it's something like that. And then later he found under the couch. He found a beer pong sign-up list.
It's always under the couch.
Right. Which we use like a cardboard lining from like a 30 rack of Busch Light to write. Yeah. Of course, that's what you write. That's what you sign up on. You can't use real paper. And then there were other things. I mean, so at that point I had a little sister who was like 6 years old. So she in her room had like her own bathroom that had like a tinier toilet that was for like kids.
Yeah.
I think someone like used her toilet, may have like fucked it up a little bit because it was like a real person going in like a kid's
kid's toilet. Yeah.
It's like a real toilet, but it's a smaller toilet for kids. So that happened. I think something like my dad, I think maybe someone had like gone on my dad's bed at some point. I think someone.
How mad was he?
Oh, he was very mad. Yeah, it was very mad about this. I mean, ironically, I think to this day he still doesn't know about the freezer door because that
is he still at the same house?
No.
Oh God, that would have been great. He listens to this and then goes downstairs and he's like, that son of a bitch.
No, but yeah, he still to this day does not know. Unless he listens to this eventually, we'll know about that freezer door. But
what's up, Mr. Frank?
Yeah, but I got caught for a lot of other reasons.
So what happened? Grounded, in trouble? I mean, you're already going to an Ivy League school. Like,
I was so I think I actually hadn't gotten my acceptance letter yet.
Oh,
really? I think it would come like maybe like 2 weeks later.
Okay.
So I still like kind of didn't know where I was going yet.
That's a little tougher. That's a little tougher situation.
Yeah, but I don't think anything really happened to me. The thing is, I did have other parties after that. That's including I think a New Year's party when I was in college.
Hell yeah.
But none of them ever, and I think I got caught again later, but none of them were ever as big as that one. This was the most, as I said, it had to be at least 100 people.
That's the pinnacle.
It was.
Did you make a conscious effort moving forward to make sure not to promote it and go crazy?
Yeah, try to keep it to a more reasonable size.
All right.
Yeah.
That makes a lot more sense. We have a couple minutes left. I wanted to ask you, if you can do it in 5 minutes, I wanted to parlay the last semester of high school with then you being a junior in college and then going to China. So when you first got to UPenn, are you drinking all the time or are you focused back on studies?
I'm drinking a decent amount because Penn is like it's very much they call it the social ivy. That's what they got. Yeah, face plant. So no, there is.
So it's the cool Ivy League school.
I think it has competition from Cornell and Dartmouth because I think Dartmouth. I think like Animal House was based on Dartmouth.
Oh yeah, the National Lampoon writers were all Ivy guys.
It's and like Penn is pretty big on Greek life, so there is a lot of drinking there. So
I can imagine. So my brother went to Cornell for his PhD, his doctorate, and my brother fucking can party with the best of them. So I'm not saying like, oh, it's just a bunch of nerds. Like most of those super smart people have serious mental issues and will try to cover it up with booze and drugs. So,
well, yeah, and basically a lot of these kids, like, they work so hard and they study so hard, they need to blow off steam.
Yeah, a lot of
somehow.
And we see that in New York. I mean, especially in the restaurant I'm in, because it's a swanky steakhouse. You get all these like super hardworking finance people and bankers and all these people. You don't see them all week, and then when they come in on the weekend, they go nuts because they're like, I got 2 days to blow off all this steam.
Exactly. So a lot of times what we would do is, we'd go out, get hammered, and then get back at like 4 a.m. Then you'd wake up 12 or 1, you'd go eat lunch, and then you'd study from like 2 to 7.
Yeah.
And hungover, but you're just like, I just got to bang out this work. And then at 7, you'd be like, okay, let's rally, let's go out again.
Yeah.
It's literally, it's cliche, but it was a work hard, play hard type of
absolutely
type of situation. So
when you got to China, did that mentality still stick?
Definitely. I think when I was studying abroad,
that's what I'm saying.
For sure, because it's China. You're trying to have a good time, and there's a lot of drinking happening, especially because in China, there's this like national like liquor they have called baijiu, which is terrible, but it's you remember those old. Years ago, those Old Spice commercials where they were like, "Scent is the strongest sense tied to memory." Yeah. If you've ever drank baijiu, that is so
100% true.
Because if you've ever had a bad baijiu experience, if you ever smell baijiu again, you are immediately transported back to every bad experience you've ever had.
Start getting the mouth sweats like you're going to throw up, and you're like, oh God.
And the worst thing is when you drink it and you have like a big baijiu night, the next day you're just burping up baijiu the whole time. So then you're tasting it again. The trauma just continues. So we drank some of that, and especially because we took advantage of the fact that like just no open container laws in China.
Oh, so you're just doing it.
It's like we're literally like chugging baijiu in a taxi on the way to the bar. Like it's so yeah, crazy drinking stuff there.
Did you get in any trouble when you were on your semester abroad?
No,
because I know there's a big drinking culture in Korea and Japan. I didn't know if it was big in China as well.
Yeah, so it is, but it's weird because a lot of the big drinking stuff in China happens like in business meetings.
Yeah.
So it's like if you look at like a lot of young Chinese people, usually they don't really drink that much. It's kind of like the middle-aged businessmen.
Okay.
That are like the huge binge.
It's
drinkers.
almost like that's reserved for them.
Yeah,
like that's
not
how business is done, and like But
like you don't. It's a little bit different because like in America, most people the amount they drink peaks some point 20 to 25.
Yeah,
that's usually when people hit their peak in terms of how much they drink. Whereas in China, to me, it seemed like most men, if they end up drinking a lot, it's like in their 40s.
Oh, okay.
Like when they're
that's really interesting.
They're doing business stuff because like you go to these business dinners. I remember there was this one dinner where I was flying in from Shanghai, and because of my flight schedule or whatever, I hadn't eaten in like 10 hours.
Is this when you're working or is this?
Yeah, this is when I was working for the NBA. But I go straight to like a dinner with this like real estate developer.
Yeah.
Out in like West China. And from the jump, it's just baijiu shots. And it's food, it's a dinner, but I haven't eaten all day. So I'm basically like, I'm trying to scarf down food to absorb all the shots that they're giving me. And I'm trying to figure out ways. There was like a soup. I was trying to figure out ways to like discreetly like pour the baijiu back into the soup.
It's disrespectful. You can't not drink it.
So you like all these creative ways to not disrespect them. But oh man, I just remember the next day we're going to like meetings and stuff. We're at this event with all these people that are just like, oh my God, that was.
I think I'm gonna die.
Yeah. Oh my God,
dude, this was so much fun.
Yeah,
I have to have you back on. We barely touched the China stuff.
I know, but I mean, it's what happens. You go where the podcast takes you.
Yeah, absolutely. Plug everything one more time. At Ben, you said at Ben Frank Comedy.
Yep, at Ben Frank Comedy.
All social media. That's all of it.
Yeah,
Twitter,
I guess
Instagram. Everything.
Yeah, I guess my TikTok is technically Ben Frank Comedian, but I suck at that. So
yeah,
Focus on the Instagram where I'm really thriving with my 2,000 followers.
There you go. Hey, more than me. Hey. Thank you everybody so much for listening. At Brennan T Comedy on all social media. BrennanTComedy.com. One Man Show is going to be released in about a month and a half. Finishing the edit on that, so keep your eyes open and subscribe on Patreon. Patreon.com/Brennan Tassif. We'll talk to y'all next week.